The Pixel 10 doesn't just look new, it feels different. That's Material 3 Expressive at work, and that's the point. To Google, it's not just a UI update, it's about making Android feel human again. I'm Jason Howell, Android fan since the beginning, and a few months back, I did a deep dive into Material 3 Expressive, back when Google first announced it. Today, I've got the Pixel 10 in my hands. This is the premier device for this design language, and we finally get to see the fruits of all that labor. So, does it deliver on the promises that Google made months ago? But full disclosure, before I dive in, Google sent me the Pixel 10 Pro for review. They actually get no editorial influence over this video. So let's start by defining the intention behind Material 3 Expressive. Google's been chasing this idea of making Android more expressive for years, even if they didn't call it expressive. Back in the material design days, it was all about unifying the look of Android, borrowing textures and some physics from the real world with mixed results, but it definitely set the trend. Then came Material U, pushing that personalization even further, letting your phone hopefully feel a little bit more you. And now with Material 3 Expressive, backed by years of research that Google really went out on a limb to make sure you knew about, Google thinks they've finally nailed it. This isn't just lifeless software. It's meant to feel alive, human, undeniably unique, kind of like us humans. And the reality is, shipping this was probably the easy part. The real question is, do people even want this much personality in a phone? Will they actually find delight or just end up tuning it out as visual noise? Google is betting on emotion being a selling point, not a distraction. So why don't we then take a look at how things have actually changed on Material 3 Expressive with Android 16 on the Pixel 10 Pro. And one good way to really show this off is to dive into some of the animations and motion physics that you get out of Material 3 Expressive. By far, one of my favorites is in notifications. When you dismiss a notification, you pull it a little bit, and you can see how it kind of catches that notification below it. And if you could feel the phone in your hand, as I get notifications, if you could feel the phone in your hand, you could feel a little haptic snap right when it lets go. That adds kind of a tangible quality to the experience, and it's really satisfying with that detach effect. When we go into the recents area, you get kind of a similar kind of approach. It doesn't quite have the haptic release until you let go, but then you feel that snap and everything kind of moves over to the side, kind of bounces in place. If I let go, you can see it kind of bounces down and up. These kinds of things go a long way in improving the experience. Then there's the volume slider, which looks kind of like a visual design update more than anything. But again, if you have this in your hand, you can kind of feel, if I ramp all the way up and all the way down, obviously on the video, you're not going to be able to tell, but in my hand, there's an incredibly subtle haptic kind of rumble that increases as it gets louder and decreases as it gets quieter, which just goes a long way of telling me where it's at without hitting me over the head with it either. Now, one effect that I was really looking forward to has to do with pulling down and up the notification shade. You can see on my Pixel 10 Pro that it kind of fades in and fades out. And that's nice, don't get me wrong, but some of the early videos that Google shared had those objects actually kind of squishing and unsquishing into place. It looked really satisfying. And for whatever reason, I'm not getting that on the Pixel 10 Pro. And one key piece here is the hope that developers are going to tap into this too. And they have access to the Material Motion API in order to do that. The question is, are they going to spread those kind of more expressive physics into their own apps and their own experiences? Another key feature of Material 3 Expressive is an expansion of their color theming approach, which they were doing a little bit in Material U. Now they're really going down deep into the color theming aspect through apps and through experiences on the Pixel 10 Pro. And it's a complete redesign through all the apps that you might interact with. Well, almost all of them anyways. I'm right now in the wallpapers area. There's a live effects section. If I go in there and pick this photo that I have of our front step with some sunflowers, I'm then given all of these options to really kind of theme it further. I can also, have it tie into local weather. Right now it's tying into local weather, but I could make it foggy if I wanted to, or add some rain to the experience. We've seen this on, I think, Samsung phones. Samsung has done this, but now Google's kind of getting in on the action. And then there's a cinematic mode that kind of brings some movement and everything. All of this is in place to really kind of make the experience come alive. And I think critical to this and the unification is this color theming that this screen right here taps into the rest of the UI experience. So now you can see the little search widget down at the bottom has a little bit of that color theming appearing there. Obviously the notification pane and the quick settings definitely themed based on my settings. Other changes of the look and feel include font differences, and not just different types of fonts, but different weights of the fonts that make it more expressive depending on what you're looking at. You can see how the quick settings have a little bit bolder of a font to kind of draw your attention. Notifications, have different weights depending on what we're actually looking at. And then of course, when you start diving into the system apps like calculator and clock, where you get all of the really big buttons and the oblong shapes and the different weights in the clock versus other aspects of the screen, all of it kind of combines together in an effort to try and draw your attention, to draw your eyes to the things that are most important about that particular view. And this is really noticeable in the Contacts app. As you can see, it kind of pulls in some of the Material 3 Expressive theming colors that I had set up earlier. And then you've got this really cool feature, which I had not seen before, called Calling Card, that allows me to set up a specific calling screen for contacts. So I can select this image of myself to appear whenever I happen to call myself. Don't think too deeply into that. But you can kind of see how the Material 3 Expressive ideals and specifications really roll through. You've got the color integrated, you've got the different weights and fonts that you can customize, and those can appear throughout the interface depending on how developers tap into them. Different colors, and all of this is just an effort, a way of showing how Material 3 Expressive aims to make your phone a little more alive, a little bit more customized and fun. Another great example is the screensaver functionality, which you can kind of see. This is the weather overlay that appears when I'm charging if I select that to be my screensaver. Got, nice and bubbly, the big different styles of shapes, different weights. Of course, the clock, also a really wonderful way to kind of show a little bit of the different kind of kerning and font types that you'll see throughout Material 3 Expressive. And then I've mentioned it a few times, but the variety of shapes, as you can see here, lots of different kind of, there's the oblong circle, there's the kind of squircle, there's the little buttons. All of this, by the way, in the quick settings can be adjusted. If I wanted to adjust this and make it a small little button there, I can do that and then move it all around and customize everything the way I want to. But again, going back to that customization piece, really making this phone my own and bringing some life, bringing some intention and meaning behind the different shapes and how they interact with everything else. Another good example of this is the media playback notification. This time I have it synced up to Spotify, and you can see the little squiggly lines, the different shapes of the buttons, the different colors being called out on that to kind of draw your attention to different places. And then we have Recorder, which is another really great example of how this design language transfers through. And I think what's different this time versus previous incarnations of Material is, in the past, Material has a certain design aesthetic that makes everything look the same. These all have still their very individual personalities, which I can really appreciate, even though you're following this like depth of customizable capabilities within the API. See, doesn't that look good when a call is coming in? Yeah, overall, this isn't just surface level polish. It's a full sensory shift in how Android feels day to day. Hello? But here's the thing, these touches aren't just decoration, they're really part of a bigger story about what Google wants Android to be next. And if you want to keep up with that story, please make sure and subscribe, and I'll continue to dive deeper into the human side of tech like I am right now. So let's talk about why Expressive actually matters, not just in how it looks, but in what it means for Google, Android, and maybe even iOS users. See, Google isn't just updating Android's look. They're trying to give it a personality that you can really identify with. And here's why that matters. On older Pixels, even going back to the original Material design, everything looked nice, but it still felt flat. Shapes and colors didn't have a whole lot of life. Material U added personalization, but Expressive takes it even further. And now every interaction feels a little bit more alive. For example, every time I swipe away that notification, there's an addictive kind of quality to it that I've noticed. The way it bounces, that little haptic pop, doesn't just disappear, it feels like something real that I'm interacting with. And once you notice that, you kind of start hunting for more of those moments. Suddenly the UI isn't just a layer on top of Android, it's something you care about, something that invites you to explore even further. And that's the difference here. Expressive gives us opportunities to care deeper about our tech again, the way maybe we did when we first fell in love with technology. And if people connect with that, well, Android becomes more than just functional. It becomes something you feel, the way iOS has managed to for years. Of course, not everything is perfect here. Most of Google's core apps, thankfully, actually ship with Expressive at this point, and that's a big improvement from years past. But open the Play Store, and it's like it's stuck on an island. It really feels out of step with the rest of the phone. Same goes for Google Maps. It looks fine, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't have that expressive flair. And the bigger risk, third-party adoption. And we've seen this before as well. If other developers don't buy in, well, then you end up with a mismatch of styles, a perception that Google's only really influential to a small corner of Android, its corner, and that Pixels will never feel as cohesive as, say, iOS has for years. Now, at the end of the day, Material 3 Expressive definitely makes Pixel 10 feel softer, more alive, more personal, and I gotta say, it sneaks up on you. I've spent a week with it, and I realize it just kind of feels better after a week. It's baked into Android 16, so OEMs are going to inherit this ability as well. But the real test, and it's often the real test, is what third-party developers do next. If they buy in, well, Expressive could reshape Android's entire feel. If not, it stays a Pixel-only flourish. And bigger still, will this design actually resonate with all users the way Google thinks it will? Could this even start pulling a few folks from iOS on over? That's a bigger story. So what do you think? Do you want your phone to feel more alive, or do you prefer Android staying clean and utilitarian? And if you're on iOS, would this ever make you want to switch? Well, leave a comment down below, share your thoughts, let's start a conversation. And if you haven't already seen my full deep dive on Material 3 Expressive, you can watch that next. It really lays the foundation for everything that you're seeing on the Pixel 10 Pro. I'm Jason Howell, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.